Brett, thanks for taking the time to talk to me about your wonderful film. I saw it, seen it twice actually. Once a couple of months ago, and then literally last night. So yeah, really, really good.
Awesome.
Just want to sort of start at the very beginning, I suppose, and sort of how the project came your way. How did it sort of ignite that spark?
Yeah, it was 2017 was the first time I talked to Phil. Phil had seen Ice Guardians, which was a past documentary I had done on fighters, and he was in the process. I think he had just won his seventh championship in a row, and so he was realizing like, hey, I should get somebody on this to do my story. And I didn't know much about bodybuilding at that point. I knew of Phil, but I had no idea the depth that the sport actually goes to as far as suffering and the passion and the characters and all that. So when I talked to Phil, the initial idea was, yeah, this is pretty cool. I was interested because I love people who dominate sports. I don't know why. I'm just fascinated by it. And Phil is literally the LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird type character of the sport in the process of actually continuing on that path. So originally, the idea was to have him go win the eighth title and tie the record while we got the film funded. And then we were going to shoot him breaking the record, breaking Olympia. And then ultimately, as people who follow the sport know, he ended up having a major injury and he lost the championship. And the sport, or sorry, the film altered from one of showing the dominance he was displaying or the role he was on to the exact opposite seat, where he was having to now make a comeback. And which was just as interesting to me, if not more interesting, because it really allowed for his psychological side to come out. He was having to deal with emotions that he wasn't, like he was having to deal with emotions while he was dominant, but they were different emotions. They were more based on motivating himself to keep going. When it became the comeback story, it was more demons that came from his past, like that he had, felt when he was playing Division I basketball and stuff like that.
Sure. So was the decision made to go back to the very beginning? Because in the beginning of the film, it kind of starts with that. So it starts with his basketball days and how the sports injury then led him on a different path. So is that something you chose to go back to after that, or is it kind of always meant to be that way?
I don't know if it would have been quite as in depth as we actually ended up going. Because the original path, like you have to remember the pandemic happened. So it really halted our shooting process at that point because we probably could have just shot a full-blown verite style documentary had that not happened. But it did happen. And also with Phil's injury, he had to recover from it. So it became more apparent as that happened and we were limited to the shooting aspect that, well, let's bring a lot of worth to how he gets to this point where he has to make the decision. Is he going to come back? Is he going to face all this and go through all this stuff once again? Because it's not an easy process for him. And that's when, yeah, the background became way more of a heavy influence. And it was just fascinating to me. A lot of people actually who don't know the sport find that part of the story just as intriguing as the other part because it's wild to see that this guy was a Division I basketball player who looked like a bodybuilder at that time before he even lifted weights. So it's yeah, it wasn't originally meant to be in it, but it definitely came in as we had to figure out the shooting process.
Absolutely. And then obviously the film, I mean, you've got this on, it almost mirrors, I know he's on the board as an executive producer, but you got Dwayne Johnson, whose path wasn't the same, but it was similar. So he was on this one path where he's, pro football player, and then all of a sudden he's not going to be able to do that anymore because of injury. So I'm not quite sure of how much involvement he had in it at that stage, or what he brings to the table as a an executive producer, and obviously his production company's involved as well. But there are kind of mirrors between the two people, aren't there?
There are, and the other comparison that came up a lot, where myself and Adam Scorgi, who's kind of like the forefront on the producing side, we would have discussions where like, man, he sounds a lot like the enforcers from the NHL. Like when you're so dominant and your identity is built upon this, and somebody at the status of what Phil had, that is who Phil is at that point in his life. He lives that to be what people have held him up to be. And when that's pulled out from under you, you sit there and you start questioning, well, what's my worth now? Like what do I do? And that actually was one of the most rewarding aspects of the film. Like, I don't want to give away the ending of it, obviously, but a lot of people might have an idea of where the story goes, especially people who follow the sport. But to see Phil's mindset evolve to the point that it did of understanding his worth beyond the sport, his identity beyond the sport. When he was doing those 7 years of domination, he had a very different mindset of how he was. He had to continuously change it, obviously. But when he got to that point with that injury, like you said, it completely changed, and he was having to go through all this depression again and everything else, and find his identity beyond the sport, which a lot of these guys tend to do. The fighters get really, really depressed after they're done fighting, and same with football players. I'm sure basketball players, anybody in that type of position.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
What I found baffling earlier on is there's a very brief comment about the popularity of the sport, particularly. I mean,
Mm,
we just had the Arnold thing over here this past weekend, the sports event that he does every year, and he does it over there as well. Of how low down the pecking order it is on ESPN, I think is the comment on documentary, and it's similar here. I mean, I think it's one of those sports where a lot of people do bodybuild, but as in terms of watching it, it's kind of a different thing altogether. And as you said before, Phil is up there with the likes of Michael Jordan and LeBron and all these other legends. Why do you think that is? Has it become more popular since you started, or is it still kind of on its way up?
Well, I think its popularity is expanding with the internet and the access to it. I think the key to this sport is people actually learning of the characters who are in it and actually understanding the sport itself, that there is the sacrifice, that it isn't just easy. The perception of outside people are these are just brutes who just it's a men's kind of muscle fashion show type thing, which is also one of the other aspects that it has to overcome, which is the subjective nature of the sport, right? Where it's not like a basketball game. You go, okay, this team scored this and this team scored this, so it's very obvious who won. When you come to these competitions, you might be pretty disappointed by who wins, because you'll be like, well, I thought the other guy won, and it's not. I think it's an area within the sport that still has room to grow, which is the judging side of it, having more transparency. Like, they at this point they kind of present points, and you don't really know. You know who got what, but you don't know why they got what. And I think if they started opening that up so people could actually understand where points were going, and that would also help bring more understanding to the sport and more popularity. But places like India and that, it is huge. So it just depends what country you go to, you
Yeah.
know.
Absolutely. And there is this intense rivalry. I mean, the one that stands out for me is Phil and Kai Green, sort of halfway
Right.
through the film, where they hated each other, right? But there's this weird
Yeah.
kind of mutual respect and of a brotherhood. They
Right.
became closer after the rivalry came up. Was that a constant thing you found during interviewing people? And the people that he did defeat over those 7 years, were they willing to sort of come forward and say their piece about how great and magnificent he is?
They were, and it's interesting because you find that with people who war against each other, like in sports terms, war against each other, that after they're done, they do have a respect for each other. And that Kai Green versus Phil one, that's like no joke. That when they were going at it, there was no respect at the time. They hated each other. And I know this because Phil talks about it off camera as well. But the respect that Phil showed towards Kai Green after the rivalry had ended is the same respect that actually does exist behind the scenes as well. Phil does exude that. So all of that is real. And the reason that that's one of the most interesting rivalries in the sport of bodybuilding, if not the most, is because it was hatred when it took place. Like, there was Ronnie versus Jay, and that was very interesting and crazy. But I don't think they hated each other, and definitely not in the way that Kai and Phil did at that time.
Yeah. Very apparent, and it comes through in the documentary. So my final question is really about yourself. Really, I had the opportunity to see your previous film with Danny Trejo, which was fantastic. Um, there are similarities between the two films and your other work as well, but they are very different. The subject matter is obviously completely different. I'm just kind of wondering, as a filmmaker and a documentary filmmaker, how what ignites the spark for you, and what is it that you look for in a project? Because they are so diverse, and there are kind of things that link them as well. So what
Right.
is that process for you?
I don't care what it's about as long as they're passionate and they're overcoming something and they're having to evolve in the way they're thinking so that we can evolve with them. And I want them to, I want to see them going from one place psychologically and ending up in another place. You know, I don't want to force something like that, but that's what I look for. You know, I hope to anticipate when I find that. So having those kind of three elements, it doesn't really matter. It could be about chess. It could be about skipping rope. Uh, I don't know, but if you've lived an interesting life and you're passionate about it and you're having to overcome some major adversity and also have to evolve in the way you're thinking and adapt to your world, then I'm interested. And it's a potential for a documentary.
Well, I love this film. I wish it all the best, and I wish you all the best with whatever you do next. I'll be first in line to see it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
But thanks for your time, and all the best for the future.
Have a fantastic day. I appreciated the interview.